Everyone, it's great to see you. House Republicans are unified and hitting the ground running under the new leadership of Speaker Mike Johnson. After earning unanimous support on the House floor, Speaker Mike Johnson has truly hit it out of the park in the People's House, and we are proud to stand with him on this leadership team. House Republicans overwhelmingly passed our resolution showing our unequivocal support for Israel on the House floor, and both Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise were widely praised for their strong statements over the weekend at the Republican Jewish Coalition in Nevada. Let us be clear, House Republicans will always stand by our precious ally Israel, and we will speak loudly and clearly when it comes to standing against the heinous rise in anti-Semitism, both at home and abroad. We proudly stand with Israel instead of Joe Biden's army of IRS agents, and shame on Joe Biden for threatening to veto this critical Israel aid package. In addition, House Republicans passed multiple conservative appropriations bills in less than 1 week, and we're working to bring more bills to the floor in the coming days. So many of the press said it couldn't be done, and yet House Republicans continue to deliver. And I also wanted to take a moment to highlight the bombshell evidence damning Joe Biden uncovered by our Oversight Committee. Bank records showing Joe Biden received $40,000 in laundered money from communist China in a form of a personal check from the account of his brother direct to Joe Biden. Remember when the White House desperately said that Joe Biden didn't discuss business with his family, and then they had to clean that up? And then they desperately corrected, saying that they were not involved in this family business. Both statements are false and should be reported as such. Joe Biden is clearly compromised, and the American people know it. House Republicans will continue to follow the facts to ensure accountability for the American people and deliver legislative results under this new era of leadership with Speaker Mike Johnson. With that, I'm honored to turn it over to my colleague, our whip, Tom Emmer.
Thank you, Elise. And this team is unified. But today we have some serious business. Babies burned alive in ovens. Girls raped so violently their pelvic bones broke. Young people mowed down as they ran for their lives at a music festival. Victims paraded through the streets in celebration. This is Hamas. Our ally Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It's fighting for its very existence and defending themselves from unequivocal acts of terror as we speak. And yet, it's baffling that some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have a hard time calling Hamas's barbarity what it is: terrorism. It's terrorism that should never be tolerated, never be excused, and never be rationalized no matter what political party you're affiliated with. That is why in our first order of business under Speaker Mike Johnson, House Republicans made it resoundingly clear that we unapologetically stand with Israel. Not just when Israel is attacked, but also when Israel rightly defends itself. Good versus evil should be easily identified in this situation, but unfortunately it's not for some. Now we're seeing anti-Semitism on the rise in this country like never before. Border agents are being warned to look out for Hamas and Hezbollah sympathizers trying to take advantage of the Biden administration's open borders agenda. And weak-kneed leadership continues to enable terrorism around the globe. Now more than ever, we cannot afford to be silent. We cannot afford to be hesitant. And as much as we may disagree on certain policy issues, we must come together to condemn Hamas without any footnotes or disclaimers. Support our ally Israel and secure our own borders. House Republicans have provided the blueprints to do all of this. I can only hope that the Biden White House and Democrats in Congress will eventually join us in delivering on these common sense policies for the American people. And with that, I turn it over to our Majority Leader, Steve Scalise.
Well, thank you, Whip Emmer. The House is off to another busy start. But if you just look at the first 24 hours under Speaker Mike Johnson, we started off passing a very strong, overwhelmingly bipartisan resolution supporting Israel. It was an important, I think, first statement that this is the focus of our new speaker, getting the House open for business again. We followed that up just a few hours later, passing an appropriations bill, getting that process back on track. Because now, if you look at last night's action, coming in, passing more pro Israel resolutions, as well as passing yet another appropriations bill yesterday, 2 more teed up this week. We will be at over 80% of government funding passing the House of Representatives, and yet the Senate is finally starting to take action because they realize that the House is serious about getting this appropriations process back on track, and our Speaker has made that very clear to our Senate colleagues as well as to the President about what's at stake and about what the focus of the House is on. If you look at today, really important pieces of legislation that we have, not just the appropriations process, but supporting Israel. Of course, we have a critical piece of the funding structure for Israel, bringing the bill to make sure that Israel has the tools it needs to fight and defeat Hamas, whether it's replenishing Iron Dome, some of the other strategic weapon systems that their leadership has asked our administration for. These are things that have gone through a very strict vetting process. We've been working with the leadership of Israel as well to make sure that in a very targeted package, we're going to pass a bill, hopefully very bipartisan, that gives Israel the funding that they need to continue to make sure they can defend themselves from these vicious attacks that Whip Emmer described. We've all seen the horrid details. This is not a time to sit idly by. The House is going to take strong action today to send that message and send that bill over to the Senate as we continue other focuses. And this is an area where the administration has been incredibly weak, and that is standing up to Iran. The House is not going to be weak in that regard today. You're going to see a strong bill to come to the House floor to say that we will put sanctions again against Iranian oil to diminish the role that Iran has played in this. As we've seen from the Biden administration over and over these last few weeks, when it's been well chronicled, how closely Iran has worked with Hamas, not just for weeks, months, but even for over a year to plan these attacks. It's not just the planning and the coordination, but the funding primarily comes from Iran. And yet last year alone, Iran, by most estimates, made about $80 billion selling their oil on world markets because Joe Biden dropped sanctions that used to be in place. $80 billion going to Iran to sell oil at a time when he's blocking American oil, President Biden. How psychotic of a policy when you're blocking American-made oil, which is the cleanest in the world, made by Americans, and allowing Iran to sell their oil on world markets, generating over $80 billion for their economy that they use to fund terrorism like Hamas. And so the House will bring a bill today to reimpose strong sanctions so Iran cannot sell their oil on world markets, sending a message all around the globe that you don't need to go buy Iranian oil. You don't need to put money into the hands of the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Get your oil from stable sources like America, but don't fund what is the largest source of revenue for Hamas and other groups all around the world, Hezbollah, so many other terrorist organizations. That will come to the floor today as well. We need to continue to send that strong message, and we're not going to slow down in the House because we've got a leader now who's gotten the House back on track, who's gotten the House open for business and sent a strong message to our allies around the world and to this administration that we're serious about conducting the people's business, fighting for those families who are struggling and standing with our allies, and that is our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much. I am really grateful for this extraordinary leadership team. Good morning to everybody and welcome here. Grateful to have you. I was just in our Republican conference meeting, and there is such a great feeling of esprit de corps amongst House Republicans. We're not only unified, we are energized. And part of the reason for that is that our members were allowed to go home for the weekend and do some district work, and everyone met with constituents. Most everyone got to go home at least for a couple of days. And they came back with reports, glowing reports about the sentiment that is felt out in the grassroots amongst the American people, and not just amongst Republicans, but amongst all Americans. What happened is we went through 3 weeks of tumult here. Obviously, everybody watched it. You all walked through that valley with us, but we came out even stronger. And I'm telling you that right now, this group is ready to govern, and we have begun that already in earnest. We share enduring core principles, and I referenced this on the floor Wednesday night last week before I took my oath of office. What we stand for are the core principles of America. I call them the 7 core principles of American conservatism, but as I said from the chamber there up in the rostrum, that it's really America's principles. It's individual freedom and limited government and the rule of law, peace through strength, and fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. These are the ideas that have guided our nation since its founding, and I believe that when we anchor ourselves to those again, we do right by the country. We are the greatest nation in the history of the world, and we are proud to say that and proud to defend it and preserve those principles. Because of all this, we have really healthy debates, even inside our own conference, sometimes about tactics, like every family does. But during a perilous time at home and abroad, we are united. And we're united in our pursuit of very clear objectives. We want to rein in reckless spending. We want to reduce inflation. And, of course, right out of the blocks here, as has been noted, we're going to support our close friend and ally, Israel. Let me explain a few of these things, and then we'll take some questions. So on appropriations, we want Americans' voices to be heard in Washington. That's what the Republicans here in the House are dedicated to, and that's why we're restoring regular order. We're finishing our appropriations process, and we're doing this in a way that is very transparent. We have accountability to be assured here. We have participation from all members of Congress, and we're moving quickly on that agenda. Last week, as was mentioned, after I was sworn in as Speaker, we passed our appropriations bill for energy and water development. Yesterday, we passed our approach bill on the legislative branch. And later this week, we're going to bring up 2 more appropriations bills. That's Interior and Environment and Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. So while each of these bills fund different parts of the government, they all share one thing in common. They're fiscally responsible. They ensure that our government is funded in a responsible manner while finding critical savings for the American people. As conservatives, we understand that savings are needed now more than ever. You all know that we've crossed the terrible landmark of $33.6 trillion in federal debt, and that threatens our security, our freedom, our way of life. The Treasury Department announced earlier this week that we have to borrow, and the American people need to understand the scope of this. We are going to borrow an additional $1.5 trillion just to fund the government over the next 2 quarters, 6 months. We're going to have to borrow the money. This is not a sustainable trajectory. And so what's happening is the effect on the American people has been really devastating. You have record high inflation is causing real pain for hardworking American families. It's leaving their futures uncertain. Families are having to make very tough, life-altering decisions because the cost of living is too high. Meanwhile, the skyrocketing interest rates are quickly turning the American dream into a mirage for millions of Americans. We feel that acutely here. And that's why House Republicans will not stop until we get this job done. We're on pace now to have 8 of our 12 appropriations bills passed by flyout tomorrow, as you heard, and we'll be right back here over the next 2 weeks to finish the job. If you need a reminder, that's 8 more appropriations bills passed than the Democrat-led Senate, which has passed, as of today, 0 appropriations bills. We're doing our job, and we hope and expect that they'll do the same. Regarding Israel, while House Republicans are leading on approps, we're also leading the charge to support our cherished friend. And last week, in one of my first acts as Speaker, we passed a resolution reaffirming our commitment to Israel in its moment of peril. And now, as Israel begins the next phase of its war, it's been kind of disturbing to us. I've heard Democrats suggest that there needs to be a ceasefire. Let us be clear. We've been very clear about this. There was a ceasefire. It was before October 7th, and Hamas broke it. And Israelis suffered unspeakable acts of evil, as you've heard even recounted here this morning. Israel doesn't need a ceasefire. It needs its allies to cease with the politics and deliver support now. And that's what we're doing. House Republicans plan to do that. We're going to do it in short order, and it provides Israel the aid it needs to defend itself, free its hostages, and eradicate Hamas, which is a mission that must be accomplished. All of this, while we also work to ensure responsible spending and reduce the size of the federal government to pay for that commitment to our friend and ally. We cannot waste any time getting Israel the aid it needs. We're going to work on that. We'll take a few questions.
Good to see you down here.
Thank you.
You say that the GOP is unified. Is that to mean that you've been able to flip Thomas Massie and MTG in the last couple of days here on this Israel package, or are you moving forward without them?
I've had great discussions with Thomas and Marjorie, who are close friends and committed conservatives, and I don't disagree with them on many issues and principles. They understand the necessity of us getting our appropriations bills done and sent over, and also the peril that Israel is in. Steve Scalise mentioned that on Saturday we were in Las Vegas. We flew over there for the night to be with the Republican Jewish Coalition. And there was a gentleman there who was on stage who spoke before us, and he shared harrowing firsthand accounts. He was a support worker in Israel of the things he saw with his own 2 eyes. And I won't even repeat them here because it's so it's just so jarring to hear it. But what they're doing to small children and pregnant women and the rest. I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the phone on Saturday evening, and he used the terms that he the next day he used in a public statement, and he said this is a battle between good and evil. It's between light and darkness, and I could not agree more. There is absolutely no equivocation here. We have to stand with Israel, and so even our most hardline, fiscal conservatives and those who typically oppose the idea of foreign aid in principle, they understand the necessity of this and what it means, and so I'm optimistic we'll get those bills over the line. I'm not going to speak for either of them, but I'll tell you that I'm continually speaking with them, and we'll see how that goes.
Just a follow-up.
Yes.
You stressed the need to be able to pay for the Israel funding. As you know, President Biden has issued a veto threat on this bill. Would you consider putting a bill on the floor that includes funding for Israel but does not have spending cuts, or is that a non-starter?
No, listen, we are in dire straits as a nation, and if you talk to leaders at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, sometimes even in recent years under oath, they've testified before the House Armed Services Committee, where I served until last week. If you ask them what the greatest threat is to our national security, you would expect, most people expect they'd say China, Russia, Iran, terrorism. They say it's the national debt. We have to address it. We have obligations and we have commitments, and we want to protect and help and assist our friend Israel, but we have to keep our own house in order as well. And I think people at home, I think the American people understand that. At home, you have to balance your budget. At home, you have to make tough decisions. And Washington should run the same way. And so we are here to change the environment, to change the paradigm, the way Washington thinks. If we continue on the trajectory we're on, it's going to hurt our country terribly, and it's going to hurt hardworking Americans even more, seniors and the rest. So we have to, while we take care of obligations, we've got to do it in a responsible manner. So I made this very clear to the president, myself, in our cordial meeting that we had. I've made it very clear to our colleagues, House Republicans. Senate Republicans. I spoke at their luncheon yesterday. To every cabinet official I've spoken to, all the way down the line, that we're going to do this in a responsible manner, and that's a very important principle for us. Right here.
Can I get a timeline from you on your thoughts about impeachment? Chairman Comer has suggested that his investigation is winding down. Do you feel right now that there is enough evidence to move on articles of impeachment? And how quickly could we see that process play out? And if you've already decided that you're heading towards articles of impeachment, or is there more that you need to see?
So many of you know my background. I'm a constitutional law attorney. I believe this is a very serious matter. I was called upon to serve on the impeachment defense team in the House twice under President Trump when the Democrats used it for raw partisan political purposes, and I decried that at each step of the way. The reason is because the impeachment power that we have in the Constitution, in the House specifically, next to a declaration of war, you could argue it's the heaviest power that we have, and it cannot be wielded for political purposes. So I have been very consistent, intellectually consistent in this, and persistent that we have to follow due process and we have to follow the law. That means following our obligation under the Constitution and doing appropriate investigations in the right way, at the right pace, so that the evidence comes in and we follow the evidence where it leads. We follow the truth where it leads. So as we stand here today, I'm not predetermined that, but I do believe that very soon we are coming to a point of decision on it. We're in the impeachment inquiry phase, as you know, which is an important step in that due process. And what you're seeing right now, although a lot of American people are anxious about this, many Republicans across the country are anxious to get to the end point on this, and I think some Democrats want to know how it ends as well. What you're seeing right now is a deliberate constitutional process that was envisioned by the founders, the framers of the Constitution. This is how they envisioned this to go, not the way the Democrats did it: snap impeachments, sham impeachments, and all the rest. So I know that people are anxious about it, but I will say, Chairman Comer, Chairman Jordan in Judiciary, Chairman Smith in Ways and Means, they've done an extraordinary job, very methodically, and I would say outside the scope of politics. They've been taking in the evidence as it goes. So we're going to follow the evidence where it leads, and we'll see. And I'm not going to predetermine it this morning. Make Scott, real quick.
Mr. Speaker, this has obviously been a whirlwind week for you with a lot of changes. You have a security detail now. People want to take photos with you in the Capitol. It's been probably a jarring transition. Can you talk on a personal level what this week has been like for you and your family back at home?
Well, I'm from Louisiana, so I describe everything in either football or hurricane metaphors. Let me say this is like an F5 hurricane. It's been a whirlwind, but in a great way. Scott, we're so humbled and blessed to have been asked by our colleagues to do this and to have a unanimous vote on the floor was an extraordinary thing, and we needed that to unify our conference. And the energy that's being felt around the country, I'm under no illusion. It's not about me. It's about this idea that we can unify. This team can pull together and get this job done for the country. And so it's a historic moment. And I don't believe I overstated it. And I think I said this on the floor Wednesday night, but I genuinely believe that the future of our republic may well be decided in the next 12 to 14 months. This is a heavy time. If you look over the scope of all of human history, and I'm an amateur historian myself, you'd be hard pressed to find a moment in our history where there are so many challenges sort of compounded upon us at the same time. And so maybe the time of the Civil War. I mean, I think arguably even in the World Wars and the Great Depression, we've not seen the collection of challenges upon us as we face right now. So we go into that very sober-minded. The first week in the job has been a whirlwind. I've spent time with 3 heads of state, cabinet officials, the secretaries of defense, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and individual members of the Senate, and all of them collectively, and everyone. And my message has been the same to everyone. Let's stay the course. Let's be steady. Let's provide principled leadership. And I commit that that's going to happen in the House. We're serious about it, and we'll continue it. So thanks.
You have some appointments to make as well, whether it be to entail in your debt commission. You said you've been thinking about chair, and you kind of want to launch that this week. I think you said on Sunday, in a matter of days, it could launch. Have you thought about who's going to chair the commission and who you would appoint on intel as well?
I've thought a lot about it, but I'm not going to reveal it here. But we have some great candidates to chair the Debt Commission. And by the way, it will not only be bipartisan. I don't know if you noticed, but when I mentioned that on the floor last week, many of our Democrat colleagues applauded that as well. That's a very encouraging sign that this is not a partisan issue. The debt is something that we all have to contend with. And so it's not only going to be bipartisan, but also bicameral. So I mentioned I had lunch with the Senate Republicans yesterday. They were all there. And I mentioned that, and the idea was met with great enthusiasm. So I believe we're going to have very thoughtful people on both sides of the aisle in both chambers come together and have some very productive discussions about that. And by the way, I believe it's also an important principle that the Speaker not predetermine the outcome of that or dictate, objectives or benchmarks. I think it needs to be an organic decision process that's made by very thoughtful people who have a passion about the issue and have expertise in the subject matter. And we have, thankfully, an embarrassment of riches because we have so many people in our conference, for example, who do have great expertise and many ideas on this. And I think that the time has come for it. So when I said I wanted to do it immediately, I meant that. And it's a top priority right now. Let me take one more.
Mr. Speaker, one more, please.
Okay, let me get Jake and I'll get.
Just on government funding,
Shit.
because you're 2 weeks away from the government funding deadline. Is your plan to move forward with the CR into January, and when do you plan to move on that?
Well, it's yet to be determined. I mean, I think everyone here recognizes that just because we're running out of time, that we may not get all this done by November 17th. As quickly as we're moving the approach bills here, the Senate's a little behind, and obviously we have the conference committee process and all of that. So there's a growing recognition that we are going to need another stopgap funding measure. I've made clear that my initial idea was to extend that to January 15th to get us beyond the sort of the Christmas rush and the things that typically jam us in the House. I think there's some good arguments for that, but some of my colleagues have other ideas as well. One idea that was pitched this morning, to be very frank with you, is a laddered CR. I'll unpack for you what that means here in the coming days, but potentially that you would do a CR that extends individual pieces of the appropriations process, individual bills. We'll see how that goes. I think we can build consensus around it, but I think there's a recognition that we have to complete the job, and we run out of the clock on this, but we want to do what's right with the American people. So stay tuned for further details. Last question with Jake. Yeah.
Do you, on just Israel, I want to nail you down on that, and Ukraine, you're just saying you will not pass Israel aid bill unless it's offset. Is that the correct interpretation?
That's what we're going to do, and the reason for that is
when it comes back from the Senate, that's your
look. Right. We're their decision they have to make on their own, but our decision is, look, the reason we pulled it from the Israel fund is that's a pile of money, $67 billion that's sitting over there to refurbish, build up, and hire new IRS agents and the rest. If you have to look at the scope and the importance of our commitments right now, my belief is that this dire situation in Israel is so important that it's more immediate than that. And if Democrats in the Senate or the House or anywhere else want to argue that hiring more IRS agents is more important than standing with Israel in this moment, I'm ready to have that debate. But I did not attach that for political purposes, okay? I attached it because, again, we're trying to get back to the principle of fiscal responsibility here. And that was the easiest and largest pile of money that's sitting there for us to be able to pay for this immediate obligation. And so we're going to stand for that, and I'm going to continue to message that to the American people. And you know what? I suspect they're with us on it. So.
And on Ukraine, just how do you intend to handle that?
Ukraine will come in short order. It will come next, and you've heard me say that we want to pair border security with Ukraine because I think we could get bipartisan agreement on both of those matters. Look, the American people feel very strongly about this, and I do as well, and I can tell you House Republicans do. We have obligations, and we have things that we can and should do around the world, but we have to take care of our own house first. And as long as the border's wide open, we're opening ourselves up for great threat. And again, it's just a matter of principle that if we're going to take care of a border in Ukraine, we need to take care of America's border as well. And I think there's bipartisan support for that idea. We're going to get right to that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.